Welcome back to Gorilla Presents. We've started up our series again. This is our third Gorilla Presents after the last one about website simulations. If you missed it, check out the recording. A link will be sent in the chat. For those of you that are new to Gorilla, Gorilla is a platform that allows you to go far beyond surveys. I'll show you a bit of that later. We have core tooling, a survey tool, a task builder tool for reaction time tasks, and an experiment builder for linking them all together. Today, we're going to be talking about gamification in Gorilla. And with us, we've got one of our previous grant winners, Drew McLaughlin, who has been using Gorilla Game Builder to build a memory study called Sandwich Builder. So today's webinar is all about gamification. We know that many of you have wanted to learn more about the advantages and feasibility of designing gamified experiments. And so what we're planning to cover today is a few points about the benefits of gamification, a demonstration of frequently used components and use cases for gamified studies, and the main meat of the action, or the main sandwich of the action, I'm not entirely sure, is Drew talking about her Sandwich Builder game. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. Panelists will then either be able to answer them as we go, or we'll pick them up at the end. To reassure all of you that today's session is being recorded and will be available on the Gorilla Presents website very soon. Don't forget to send it to any colleagues or friends who might find it interesting or who might have missed it. So let me jump right in. So I should probably introduce myself. I have done a little bit already. I'm Joe. When I was studying experimental psychology, I had to code my tasks in MATLAB and then collect data face-to-face in the lab. It took me a long time and it was slow and it was frustrating. And the worst bit I always found was when you're eagerly anticipating a participant turning up so you can get their data and then they just don't show up and you just feel like you've wasted your whole afternoon. So to solve that data collection problem, what I did was I convinced the director of London Science Museum to let me collect data there. I said something like, let visitors take part in science, not just learn science history. And then I collected my data from, I think it was 100 parent-child dyads in about 2 weeks. It was very cool. But I was still envious of those using questionnaire tools to collect data quickly at scale, often in just one day. And collecting your data in 1 day rather than 2 weeks seemed like something that should exist. And that's what I wanted for me. So with Gorilla, that's what I have tried to create for all of you. So this is sort of how I ended up seeing the research landscape. There were online survey tools that were easy, but they weren't powerful enough to collect the type of data that experimental psychologists and behavioral scientists need. And then there were some people who were coding in the lab and very few who were coding online and setting up their own servers. And collecting data in the lab. What I thought should be possible was to create an online platform that was as easy as a survey builder, but as powerful as a lab task builder or as code, and that supported a far wider range of psychology methods. I thought something should exist up in this corner so that researchers didn't need to learn to code to collect data at scale, so that cognitive and behavioral scientists could also benefit from the increased speed, scale, and reach of online participant pools and make the world a better place based on evidence. And so that's what we've tried to create with Gorilla. And to a large extent, we've succeeded. So what is Gorilla? In a nutshell, participants go in and gorgeous cognitive and behavioral data comes out. Inside Gorilla, you'll find a variety of tools, a survey tool, for creating surveys, as powerful as Qualtrics, a tool for creating tasks, more powerful than something like ePrime, and then an experiment builder for creating your experiment flow with randomization and counterbalancing, but also a game builder, a multiplayer tool, a shopping simulator, a UX and UI simulator, and today, I guess as one researcher has said, if you can dream it, Gorilla can build it. Let me just show you a short video showing you all of the things that are possible and that allow you to go far beyond surveys. So with Gorilla, our ideal is to give you detailed behavioral metrics no matter the task. We support these traditional reaction time tasks where you can have any type of stimulus and any response and you get accuracy and reaction time measures. Eye tracking is supported using the webcam, but mouse view is a popular approach of combining mouse tracking and eye tracking. So it's eye tracking without the eyes. Drawing tasks are a different way of eliciting inputs from participants. You can capture creativity and more nuanced thought processes. We also have a super cool, here, more on the drawing tasks. We also have this super cool game builder, which is the subject of today, which allows you to create engaging reaction time tasks. This is particularly useful when working with children, as engagement correlates with data quality. We also have a multiplayer tool so that you can study behavior in a social context. This includes text and video chat so that participants know that it's not faked. Then we have this shop builder tool, which allows you to create your own shops where you determine the products, the prices, the adverts, and more. And this tool is particularly useful for consumer psychologists. Shop builder is often combined with social media simulations to investigate how to influence consumers. These are for the consumer psychologists, also the epidemiologists. And you can create navigation simulations by essentially linking photos together. This is an easy way of studying how people navigate around a space, capturing how they behave in a controlled environment. Of course, you can manipulate it between conditions as well. And the same techniques can be used to simulate a website or a document to test navigation, messaging, and information retention. So hopefully that gives you some ideas of how far beyond surveys you can go with a tool like Gorilla. A few weeks ago, we hosted a workshop on these UX UI studies, but today we're going to be looking at gamification with our game builder. So let me show you the highlights of the game builder with this short video. With Game Builder, you can gamify any task by combining artwork with animations and particle effects. These enhancements increase participant engagement so that you get higher data quality. Behind the scenes, it's quite simple. You can trigger image transforms based on the trial timeline or user action, and trigger particle effects like puffs and stars to give visual feedback. Let's look at a before and after. A classic go-no-go task is static and less engaging. Simply just appear and disappear. With Game Builder, the same go-no-go task feels more alive and more engaging, which increases participant attention. All we've done is added some image transforms and pulses. Our animation engine makes programming this easy. It's no more complex than the animation engine in PowerPoint. There's an intuitive timeline where you combine the effects you need and then preview them instantly. Then with the particle engine, you can create effects like shimmers and puffs or stars or smoke. All you need is an image and to twiddle these 8 settings. It's fun to see the variety of effects that you can create. Particle effects can also be combined and linked to create compelling visual effects, like this rocket. The last cool feature is our collision engine, which allows for dynamic interaction between items to make your game seem alive. So now, when this car hits the coin, you get a puff of your reward animation, and when the car hits the rock, it triggers the error animation. So now that you've seen some examples and you can see some of the things that gamification can do for you, let's break it down a little bit. We think gamification increases data quality in these 3 ways. It increases attention on the task. It grabs your participant attention so that they're there. And the second bit it does is it increases the motivation to stay on task. That's the second part. That's often by providing the narrative, so somebody's invested in the story. And thirdly, it increases performance through meaningful reward structures and incentives. These come together to transform often dull and repetitive tasks into rich and rewarding experiences, which means that you get generally better data quality. It's much easier to do research on kids that would otherwise be impossible. Kids typically won't take part in dull studies, and you can get people to take part in longitudinal studies that they wouldn't take part in otherwise because they're too boring. And this opens up research avenues that would otherwise be impossible. And I think what I'd like to ask you to do now is, which of those 3 points excite you the most? I think there's going to be a poll that everybody can take part in. And so I think it's a poll that says, are you most interested in just generally better quality data, doing research with kids, or being able to launch longitudinal research? Claire, is the poll coming up?
I think so.
It
People have
is
started answering.
I can see it already.
You can see it. Wonderful. Excellent. I'm not allowed to vote, but I can see it. Oh, I should. How do I? Claire, how can I see? Oh, I think I've clicked the wrong button. Has everyone voted?
We've got 24 responses, so that's pretty good.
Wonderful. Excellent. Thank you so much for voting. I don't think I can share the results. Claire, do you want to say what people voted for the most?
We've got 54% voting for better quality data, 38% for research with kids, and 8% for longitudinal studies.
Excellent. Wonderful. And with that, I'm now going to hand over to Johanna. Haha, yes, it's come up now. Hand over to Johanna to talk you through a case study.
Perfect. Thank you, Joe. I wanted to present this case study because it's a really interesting example, and I've contributed myself to this example. So here we've got Marie McSweeney, who works at the Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience at UCL. And Marie's challenge was to carry out a randomized controlled trial in schools and reach the target population of deaf students. Now, for that population, and as this was a longitudinal study, it was quite hard to actually find an experiment that worked for her, and that was at the same time also easy for teachers to administer. Marie's solution to that challenge was a fun-to-play online speech rating game, which was accessible from the school with the school equipment, which was able to maximize the training impact and the protocol compliance by using Gorilla Game Builder. What we can see in the quote here is that Marie was actually able to reach this hard-to-reach deaf children population group with this gamified task. And you can see a little example of how that looked like here, where we've got the little monster and then the video of the person pronouncing a word, but which was silent. So participants couldn't actually hear a voice coming out of that. And now what we have done in Gorilla, Joe, if you just go to the next slide, excellent. Here we have got an example of how that game worked like in a different task. Again, we've got the video of the person just pronouncing a word silently, and then participants have to guess or make a best guess of what that word that was pronounced was. And this game is animated with the little rocket flying around in space, and then we've got the 4 different stimuli coming up on the right-hand side. Now, that was built in Gorilla Game Builder. We can see the interface of how that looked like here. And it actually involves not a single line of code. So all of this is just done in the graphical user interface by combining components and animations together to create those visual effects. What you can see here is actually the rotation of the rocket. You can see that the rocket follows the mouse movements. So this is just another of those animations which Game Builder is able to do, and again, fully without code. Now, I am going to hand over to Drew, who's going to present her sandwich builder to us. And yeah, we are going to stop our presentation, and Drew, the stage is yours.
Okay. Can we all see the screen?
We can see the screen.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to tell you about the work I've been doing and tell you about this experiment/game that I have built using Gorilla's Game Builder. So the goal was to build a gamified experiment that can measure short-term memory. And so that's what I've been working on. And before I dive into the exact specifics of the game, I want to give you a little bit of context about what led me to want to do this project and what my research area is. So I come from the generation of people who are influenced by Bill Nye and who think science is really cool. And I want my participants to also think that science is really cool. But often when we're doing cognitive research, we have our participants do experiments that are really boring and repetitive and often fatiguing. And a very reasonable response to this is that it's necessary. We have to control for so many factors in our research that we really just need to boil things down to the bare bones, have participants do lots of trials and so on and so forth. But what I'm going to argue for in this talk is that while in some of my research, for example, it's necessary for it to be boring, in some other areas, I've discovered that there could not only be possibilities for it to be a little more creative, but also there could be some benefits to the creativity as well in terms of participant engagement. So I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of context of what my research is like and an honest reflection I did on my research semi-recently, which can sometimes be boring, although I think, of course, that it's very interesting. So this is just a very broad overview of a study I published in 2021, in which participants were doing what's called a speech and noise perception task, where they hear a sentence over headphones and then they just have to type what they heard. But there's noise in the background, like the sound of static on a TV, and that makes it really hard for participants to hear the sentence. And that's intentional because we want to really push the speech processing system to the edge and see what it can do, what it's capable of. Now, in this same study, we had participants do some additional tasks. So one of these was a short-term memory measure. And since all of my research is very auditory focused, participants essentially heard long lists of words and then they had to repeat them aloud. And something I want to note here is that this task was not only very boring and repetitive for the participants, but it was very boring for me. I was a PhD student at the time, and the way this task was administered was I was in the room typing what they were saying in order to record their responses. And so when I reflect on this study, it is definitely a source of the motivation I had for developing a task that you'll see not only is engaging for the participant, but on the researcher side, it's very efficient in terms of it, it doesn't require oversight. In this case, it's made to be administered online. And then the last little thing in this study that I'll also note is that we measured hearing ability, which is another auditory task where participants raise their hands. And this is the sort of task that we can't really change. It's called pure tone audiometry, and it's the standard in audiology for how we measure hearing ability. But if we take a look at these three tasks from the study, the first one I would call the standard task for measuring comprehension in my research area, which is speech perception. This task, I could maybe make it more interesting, but for the most part, it's the area where I want to have the most control over my research. These other two tasks are what I would call measures of individual differences. And when I did an honest reflection on my work, what I saw was that there are some tasks, like that short-term measure of memory, that didn't need to be boring, essentially. I need to get a good measure of memory, but this is really like an additional characteristic of the participants that I'm gathering. It isn't the meat and potatoes of my study. The meat and potatoes is the listen and type task. And so if what our goal is to measure something like short-term memory and look at individual differences. So this is just a scatter plot showing the relationship between these two tasks. And you can see that older adults tend to have poorer memories and also do poorer on older adults, there's a stronger correlation here. So if you have a poor short-term memory, then you do poorer on this comprehension task. In the younger adults, there isn't as much of a range of memory. And there's not much of a relationship either. But clearly memory was relevant, but I had this thought of why not create a more engaging measure of short-term memory? Thinking also not just in terms of practicality, but in terms of theoretical benefits. So for example, if I'm having participants come in and they're doing a 2-hour study, that's a long time for them to be doing a study. And if any of the tasks that are part of this larger battery can be made more exciting, I think it's fair to assume that the participants will be less fatigued over the course of the entire experiment. So enter onto the scene now, sandwich builder. So I had an idea. I was like, I want to create a gamified measure of short-term memory. And so I had this image in my mind of a sandwich building task. So it's a really common type of game, just the sort of like food, you know, or taking an order and making some sort of food creation. Like this is a kind of game that's really viral on the internet usually. And I was like, I feel like that could be a good way to measure memory. I wanted to keep the task relatively short. I wanted it to automatically score itself, and I wanted to be able to do it online. And what I started with was drawing a lot of images. And so I wanted to just sort of show a little bit of the behind the scenes of how I developed this task. So I have an iPad and I use an Apple Pencil with it in the Procreate app. And I drew all of the images digitally for this experiment. And this is, you know, a bit of a unique skill set, but I learned everything I learned online. So I'm not, you know, I'm not essentially trained, I am self-taught. And so this is just a screen capture of me messing around on my iPad, and you can see that you essentially have endless possibilities. And so what I did a lot for this project was I would look up the picture of a fried egg on the internet, or often someone else's drawing of a fried egg, and then I would try to recreate it myself. And so in that way, I was able to generate lots of different food images for this project. And once I had those food images, I thought, all right, this is going to be easy. Now I just need to make it into a game. And I started with CyclePy Coder. I'm a very proficient coder in CyclePy, and I thought for sure that this would give me all of the possibilities I could ever want for making this feel like a real game. But I actually pretty quickly came up against a wall where CyclePy, it would sort of like crash, essentially. It couldn't handle the images, it couldn't do animations, and just the layers of complication were not really worth the effort. Like, quite frankly, I put a lot of hours into this, and it didn't look like a game. And I was a little bit disappointed in that, and then was fortunate enough for a call from Gorilla to come out, saying that they were looking for grant applicants. And so I applied, and I did get a Gorilla and Prolific grant to try out the game builder. And so I already had a lot of images drawn. I had this idea of what I wanted to make. And so I started using Game Builder like 3 or 4 months ago. And I wanted to just start by showing you what I've created. So it's going to show you as if you're a participant starting the task, so we can see the instructions are up. And it'll play 2 trials in a row. So it's like a minute-long video that we're going to watch. And this is just to give you an overview of what I've created and to really give you the big picture of like, it feels like a game. And I'm really proud of it. And then I'll go through and describe how I built it, what the data looks like, and what my plans are for validating it as a measure of working memory. So in this game, participants are taking orders from customers as if they're taking them from a drive-through. This way, I chose to do it this way because I focus on auditory processing, although I have thought about developing a visual version of this task also. They need to memorize the list of ingredients and then add them to the customer's sandwich in the correct order. And if they get an order correct, they move up a difficulty level. So here is the overview showing you what Sandwich Builder looks like now. So this is just a screen calibration, just to make sure that participants can see the 4 corners.
Hi, I'd like a sandwich with turkey and mayo.
Hopefully that audio went through fine, but that was them getting the order, and then they've gone on to building the sandwich. And then the sandwich
the audio came through fine for me, so I think everybody could hear it. It was very cool.
Oh, perfect, perfect. And so it's moved on to the next trial, and you'll see that they are now on level 3 because they got it correct.
Sandwich with arugula, tomato, and olives.
So in this way, there's a lot of visual things going on which gives it a very game-like feeling, but you can also tell that it's got a very trial-wise format still. And so we're sort of maintaining the integrity of this is for research, and we need to measure how good people are at this task. And so that we have very much that trial format. The way I have designed Game Builder is to have 18 trials, and I've used a staircase procedure. And so this is just giving you a broad overview of what the responses that get recorded when participants are clicking look like in the end when I process the data in R. And what I wanted to point out is this is an example of me doing the experiment, and I have a span score of about 4 typically. And so you can see that when I got to trial 4, I was on level 5, which means I need to remember 5 ingredients, and I got pickles incorrect. So this is the correct answer here on the right. I put peppers instead, and I got the order of mayo and Gouda wrong. And so here on the right, this is just whether or not the trial was scored as correct. And this is scored online by Gorilla's system. And because I got this trial incorrect, it moved me down back to level 4. And so this is the way I've sort of created the task. All participants complete 18 trials, and we can essentially just tally up how many times they passed each level. So in this example of me doing it, I never passed level 5. So I would take this modal passed level as my score, but participants can get partial credit for passing levels above their modal level. And so that's the scoring procedure I've come up with. So that's what the data looks like. That's sort of like the overview. I want to now take a moment to describe how I made that whole game. And I want to point out a couple of key features and then show you on the back end when you're actually in Gorilla's system with the game builder, what it looks like to put this together. So one of the key features that I wanted to incorporate were animations that essentially direct attention. So there are 2 in this first snippet that I'm just going to play on a loop for us that I want to discuss first. So the first of these is what I call the level flag. So it's over here on the left. We can see that it slides in at the beginning of the trial. This is essentially, I needed to incorporate some way to tell the participant how many toppings to expect. I didn't want it to be a surprise to them. And calling it a level is very game-like, and having it slide in can draw the eye towards it, but they can look at it and then they can essentially move on with the trial. The other thing that is moving in the center of the screen is this button I've created that says take order. And I have this set to pulse. So this is an animation feature. And it pulses, and that in theory should draw the eye to it as well, so that participants will know I need to click on that to essentially get this trial going. So what does this look like on the back end? So this is the game builder. Right now we are looking at one of my scenes. I call this drive-through scene 1. And these are the objects in the scene. So we have like the background, we have the button, which is called take order button, and the level flag, and a couple other things going on that we aren't going to focus on at the moment. So let's start by taking a look at how I had that level flag slide in. So first of all, if we click on this object, we can see that a bunch of features essentially populate on the right. So we have the name of it, which is identification. It is a sprite, which is the word for images. So pretty much every object in my game is used as a sprite. And then I'm using the animation tool. It is set to do an animation that I've created and play it on start. And so this is just an animation I made. You can see that I have the item, the image starting off screen, and then I have it move 400 units along the x-axis, and that's how I get it to slide inwards. So that is the level flag. Another example, looking at that take order button now, this is how I essentially did all of the buttons for my game. Again, we have a sprite, and this is just an image, again, that I made on my iPad. And I have the animator tool just like before, and it's set to pulse, and I'll show you what that looks like within the animator tool in just a moment. The other thing I want to point out, though, is that there is another feature added for the take order button, which is click to continue. And so this is essentially what turns it into a button. As soon as there is a click response detected within this area of the screen, it will continue to the next part of the task, which will, in this case, be playing the participant's order. So this is just to sort of show you a comparison of the take order button and the level flag. We can see only the take order button has the click to continue, And if we look in the animation tool, it's a pretty simple animation. It is just the pulse animation, and I have it set to scale the image to be 5% bigger over the duration of 1.5 seconds, and it loops. And so that's how you get that nice eye-grabbing animation of a button in the middle of the screen. All right, so that was sort of like a quick overview of a couple of the simpler features. The way that the game builder is set up is you create different scenes. And the most complex scene of the sandwich builder is the area for what I call response collection. This is a very gamified aspect of this experiment because I wanted participants to really be interacting with it, as opposed to they could have just typed what they heard, for example, and I could have scored based on typed responses, but I didn't want it to be like that. I wanted it to feel like a game. And so in this section, click behavior is what causes the sandwich toppings to appear and then move down to what I call the staging area, which just sort of simplifies things, having this staging area. And it also allows the participant to keep track of how many, in what order they've added ingredients up to that point. So we can watch this quick video, which is from the same one that you saw before, where the participant has clicked arugula, tomato, and olives, and then they click build it. And the build it button is what essentially, it ends this stage of the task. It's the submit button, but it plays a sort of playful animation where it spins around and turns from a sub with some ingredients into a wrapped sub with the sandwich builder logo on it. So first of all, shout out to Joanna and Megan from the Gorilla team, because they gave me a lot of help with this, because this was a very complex aspect of the task. And I want to describe how I ended up pulling this together. So first of all, this is all just layers upon layers of images that are being told to essentially slide around the screen. The background image is the entire wall and all of the boxes. So I drew this on my iPad, and I could have instead had these boxes be their own objects, but I decided that wasn't necessary, and I'll show you in just a moment why it didn't seem to be necessary, because I used what's called the hotspot feature. And so then I have additional images that change from trial to trial. So for example, the number of items that a participant is going to get can vary from trial to trial. And so that's why I have a different layer for this staging area. We have the bottom of the sandwich, which is going to have an animation plate on it where it spins around, which is why it's separate. And then we have the build it button. Then the way this is set up is that as soon as there is a click detected, so right now I'm adding the arugula image on top of the arugula box. As soon as a click is detected, an image that's essentially a small version of whatever food item it is will float down to the staging area. But as you can imagine, this is a pretty complex process, because if you click on arugula and then you click on avocado, you want them to go to 1 and 2 respectively. And if you click on them in the opposite order, you want them to go to the different staging areas. And so we have to keep track of how many ingredients have been clicked on so that we know where to send this, cute little image to. Do we send it to 1? Do we send it to 2? So on and so forth. So let's take a look behind the scenes. This section, the scene of the task, I call it the builder scene. So you can see that's up here in the upper left. It is the most complex section, and you can see I'm scrolling through the objects right here, and there are a lot of objects. So what I'm starting with is I'm clicking on the arugula box. And what I've actually just clicked on is what I'm going to be calling a hotspot, because it uses the hotspot feature. So I've named this arugula hotspot, and you can see that I essentially, I defined this area on the screen. And because the game builder is interactive, I didn't have to come in with like a measure and figure out where the arugula box was. I could literally drag and place this hotspot on top of my pre-made image, which was extremely convenient. This hotspot is basically looking for click responses. If there's a click response, then it's going to trigger, quite literally, a whole bunch of things to happen. And so this is just sort of sliding through and showing you, okay, it would trigger an animation, which would be that arugula item floating down. There's a little bit of detail here that I'm going to skim over as far as how we keep track of which number it should go to. The other thing that I've added here is called trigger enabled. And the reason I have that is because we want to essentially disable the arugula box as soon as it's been clicked on. Participants can't click on the same item more than once within the trial. So they can't accidentally use the same ingredient twice. Okay, the next thing I want to show you, so I was just showing you the objects tab. So notice how objects is in red. These are actually different tabs that have different features available in them. And there are a lot of possibilities that made this task possible, and they're all located in the screen tab, actually. So the first of these is that I am keeping track of what's been clicked on. So this is the save data feature. And this is actually what I would call, because I have sort of a coder's perspective, it's a counter. I created a counter, and that way I'm keeping track of how many clicks have been made on the screen, and that's how I know where to send the images to. 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 10 is the highest level in the task, which probably no one will ever actually get to level 10, but I wanted to really overextend the possibilities of how far participants could get. So it's keeping track of how many clicks have been made. So this is a feature, this is a field being saved to the store, and it's called response count. So in this way, it's sort of a graphic user interface for doing what I would call a counter, if you're more used to coding. I'm then collating the responses. So any time one of these boxes gets clicked on, there is a tagging feature that'll essentially send arugula in lowercase, avocado in lowercase, and it's being collected by the collate responses feature, and it's just joining them together with an underscore. So I showed you earlier what the data looks like in the end, and so this is how, if you click arugula, then avocado, and the trial is done, it will save as the response arugula underscore avocado. And this also means that I can automatically score, compare against a column in my spreadsheet that has the answers. And because I can automatically score, I can also use the change difficulty spreadsheet feature. This allows me to do that staircase procedure, which is hugely beneficial in my mind because it reduces the total number of trials you need to do. You are essentially adapting the task's difficulty for that participant, as opposed to having them do a bunch of trials at every difficulty level and then looking at the data and finding out that they never passed a level higher than 5. So why did you have them do level 10 when they clearly never could have passed level 10? And so all of this within the screen tab is part of what makes the task, I would say, efficient. And so you can see I have a bunch of spreadsheets. That's just like a typical Gorilla experiment. And it's just in the screen tab being called. So the screen tab essentially is what allows me to automatically score participants and do a staircase procedure very seamlessly integrated with this very gamified experiment. So I'm going to start to wrap up here. I wanted to, all in one place, summarize the key features that I used from Gorilla's Game Builder to make Sandwich Builder happen. And I've organized them into the Objects tab versus the Screen tab, which is the one I was just describing. In the Objects tab, I use the sprite feature a lot. This is just to say, like, I want there to be an image shown. I used hotspot a lot also. And so this was a decision I made. I could have done it 2 different ways, essentially. I could have just had the background be a brick wall with nothing, and then had boxes that say arugula, so on and so forth, with the ingredients as different images on top. But I decided to make the background image one flat thing and put hotspots on top of each of the ingredient boxes to keep track of whether participants click there. And I think this is what's really powerful about the Game Builder. There are multiple ways to do the same thing. And so you can sort of decide for yourself which is better for your particular circumstance. The animator tool clearly gets used a lot. This is what just allows you to create eye-catching things and also just cute things. I didn't have to animate a delivery to a delivery window, but it sounded fun, and so I did. And it was really, really easy to do. Essentially, I made I do have a special skill, which is designing digital art on my iPad, but I make static images. I don't know how to make animations, and I didn't need to learn how to do that in order to get really cool graphics like the delivery of a wrapped up sandwich to a window. And so that's the power of the animator tool. And then the last thing is click response for the objects tab. And this is just keeping track of when you've clicked on things, which triggers animations. I also do tagging here, which is how I keep track of if you clicked in that arugula hotspot, it's going to send the word arugula in lowercase with the tag response, which is then going to be collected by the screen tab. So this is, again, that summary of the screen tab. I went through this in pretty good detail. One thing I didn't know is feedback time. This is a feature that just essentially says if the participant clicks on a button or something that essentially ends the routine, you can tell it that you, like, even though they've clicked continue, like a continue button, you can say, I want you to wait 7 seconds, and then you can add in all sorts of animations. I use this quite a bit because participants, when they click submit to build the sandwich, I wanted to then play the animation of the sandwich getting wrapped up. Yeah, and so saving data, collating responses, all of this, all the way down to the change difficulty feature is what I used in order to make that staircase procedure, which allowed me to keep the task very short. And so I'm really happy with how that turned out as well. As part of the Gorilla and Prolific grant, I will be validating Sandwich Builder. So to actually demonstrate that this is a good measure of short-term memory and that it's reliable. So I'm going to be doing that as an online experiment, hopefully soon. I'm getting ethics approval soon. And I plan to make Sandwich Builder available on Gorilla's open materials so that anyone can just plop it into their experiment. I also have my eyes set on making Spanish versions of the experiment, so both Castilian and Latin American Spanish, because I know it will be useful for my research, because right now I'm living in Spain and doing research in Spain, and so I work with a lot of Spanish populations, and so having the same exact task in multiple languages, I think is going to be really powerful also. And I also see potential for a visual version. I do auditory research, so of course I went straight to the auditory version, but you could imagine that instead of a drive-through where you're hearing the order, maybe a receipt pops up with a list of ingredients on it. And so there are lots of different takes on the same experiment, which they should all get at this construct of short-term memory, but depending on your area of research, it might be more useful for you to have a visual versus an auditory version. And so that's what I have in mind for next steps. And thank you so much for your time and attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions.